Subandrio is known for his heavier, deep driving bass lines, contrasting beautiful melodic atmospheres and storytelling within his music. This has gotten him signed frequently to such labels as Sudbeat, as well as signing to Mango Alley and Early Morning, which is Guy J's new label. I'm going to show you how I created this project, and then you can download the project file, presets, samples, everything included in the link in the description below or up in this card right here. It works in Ableton 10, 11, and 12, and these videos and this project is for educational purposes only. This is to teach you how to make music like this so you can go and learn how to curate your own style and develop your own music. Subandrio's style of music, we usually need multiple deep driving bass lines with a bunch of accent basses that really encourage the groove. The drums are usually pretty high energy and splashy, using textural percussion to fill up the space in the mix and add more rolling and drive to the track. Synths are usually pretty atmospheric, as the main aspects of the track are the drums and the groove of the bass line, but the synths give a ton of ear candy, and the synths are there to engulf the listener in the beautiful atmosphere and emotion, tying the whole vibe all together. Shout out to Subandrio for giving me the green light to cover his style. There's links to support him and check out his music in the description below. Let's get started. All right, let's take a listen to the drums now. Okay, so you might notice that the drums are pretty aggressive, pretty like splashy, a lot of high end. This is intentional because to make the energy feel a bit faster, you can use sharper sounds. So for example, the ride cymbal, this is a very bright, very sharp sound. This can actually increase the perceived tempo of the track. So you have your regular tempo, which is like your BPM, the speed of the track, but you also have the perceived tempo. How fast does it feel? That's why you can have tracks at 125 BPM that feel slower or less energetic than a track at 121 that feels more aggressive based on the different instruments. So one of those things is the sharpness, having things like the ride cymbal or crunchy, sharp hi-hats, sharp shakers, that will increase the perceived tempo. And the other thing is fast moving sounds. So if you have a lot of percussion or shakers that are hitting really fast versus ones that are hitting a little bit further in between, that will also increase the perceived tempo. I'll show you an example of this. Listen to the drums without the ride and without the driving percussion and see how different the energy feels. So to me, it sounds considerably more energetic when I have the ride and that driving percussion turned back on. So that's something that's really important and a really good tip to keep in mind. The group processing itself, I have some EQ and some reverb. These are both just used to create a bit of tension in the breakdown. So I have the dry wet of the reverb increasing as the track is building up. Pushes the drums further back in the mix, which creates tension. And then right before the drop, I bring them back in. And just by bringing them back in like this, I feel like it kind of rushes the drums to the front of the mix, which I think sounds pretty cool. Very subtle. And then the EQ on the drums as well is cutting out the frequency of the top end. Could probably go even a little bit lower. And that also just creates, a bit of movement in the track and makes it a bit more interesting. Then I have a glue compressor on here, just reducing a little bit. Heatwave is a distortion tool. It's a free one, and it is adding a little bit of crispiness. Again, just to give a little bit of edge to the drums. It's a really subtle distortion. That's why I like it. It just adds a tiny bit of warmth. And I have this clipper. This is a great tool for making your mixes a bit cleaner and allowing them to be louder when you're doing compression and limiting. Basically, what a clipper does is cuts off the tips of your instrument's peaks. So imagine you are taking your hair and you grab the scissors and cut off the very, very top tips of your hair, and that makes your hair kind of go flat across. That's basically what a clipper is doing. Very similar to a limiter, except the limiter kind of just like folds the hair down onto itself. The clipper actually will cut that right off. And basically what that does is allows your compression or your limiting to be cleaner and not be triggered by these peaks that aren't really of any value to your track. So it will allow your compressors and limiters to react a bit more efficiently. And you can just go with your clipper, bring this down until you get some clipping or gain reduction. You don't want to hear the clipping itself most of the time. You don't want to hear it get distorted or get any like quieter. You just want to be cutting off the tips of those peaks Sometimes I find it makes my my drums actually sound a little bit punchier because it's kind of cutting off the sharpness and allowing more of the mid frequencies to get through, but it should be pretty subtle. The goal is to just cut off a few decibels without hearing a major difference, and that's going to allow your limiters and compressors to react a little bit better. Lastly, I have the return tracks. The return on the drums, just a very simple reverb. A little bit of pre-delay would help actually. Let the drums be a tiny bit punchier. And then the New York compression. I have a video on this. It's a 2-minute video. I'll put a link up to it in the corner, but basically you're compressing the crap out of your drums and then introducing a little bit of that back into your drum loop. And that's going to make your overall drums feel louder without actually adding any or maybe a tiny bit of peak volume, which again allows your limiters to work a little bit more efficiently. So listen before and after. Subtle. It's like an extra 2 or 3% of that volume, but when you get into the professional mixing and mastering, this can make a pretty substantial difference. All right, let's get into the actual MIDI and the instruments themselves. Main hat is 2 layers, punch and body. I'm actually pushing down the transposition because I find that the hats are a bit too sharp. So bringing them down a few semitones will actually make them feel a little bit longer and more full because you're kind of stretching out the sample to lower the pitch. And the lower pitch also has more mid frequencies. So it kind of hits a little bit harder. And that's a good way of making your hi-hats that are a bit thin feel a bit fuller. Then I just have a little bit of EQ cutting out the lows of the hats. The MIDI itself is pretty simple. I just have the main hat here and a second hat with a little bit of a swing. So these have lower velocity, so they're hitting a little bit lighter and they're just there to add a bit of swing to the drums. Without. Gives it a nice little bit of swing, makes it a little bit more interesting to listener, and it actually makes it feel a tiny bit more driving because those hits are still pretty aggressive. Up next, I have the open hat, and all this has is the has effect, and that is adding a bit of stereo width. You want to make sure that you're not going too low or too high, and you can check in mono because if you go too low, you'll run into phase issues. If you go too high, you get this like weird doubling sound. So you want to go back and forth until you find that sweet spot. The sample itself is a pretty big open hi-hat, so I've cut out a lot of the tail. A lot of open hi-hats I find are way too aggressive. They're way too open. You don't need that much open hi-hat really, for this style at least. So I like to cut out a lot of the tail and then I cut it even shorter. And that gives me a nice like open, tighter sounding hat without the big tail. Combine that with the main hat. Up next, I have the ride. This is in a lot of Subandrio's tracks. And again, it's to add that perceived energy. So this ride, really nice addition to the track. It has the Haas effect, some sidechain compression, and some EQ. But it's just a simple 909. And I've increased the pitch by 3 semitones. Make it a bit brighter and fit with the track better. And also I've faded in the beginning. That's to get rid of the transient. I don't need that because I already have the hi-hats and the open hats filling up that initial hit of the drums. Then I have some EQ. Compression. This is coming from the kick, so you get like this nice pumping effect. You could even go a bit harder. Gives it that nice groove that lands with the kick. Then some more stereo imaging. Sharp shaker here. This is from a sample pack from Basic Waves. Just some compression from the main hi-hat. So when this main hi-hat is playing, it's actually squishing down about 10 to 12 dB on here, and that allows for the main hat to squish down the shaker, allowing it to punch through a bit better. And I get asked all the time, which sample packs should you use? I actually have a list of sample packs, preset packs, synths and tools and effects that I use. It's on my Discord. If you want to join my Discord, it's a great place for a community because we have producers talking about music, sharing their favorite music, talking about like marketing and the business side of things, or just honestly hanging out and just talking about anything. So if you want to join that Discord, I highly recommend joining the community. I'll put a link in the description below. And then, like I said, you can find a list of all the samples and presets that I suggest checking out. I'd love to have you as part of the community. Shaker loop is pretty self-explanatory, filling up space in the mix. Then I have another loop. This one's probably not even necessary. It's just here to kind of bulk up the loop a little bit. And because it's kind of more driving and consistent energy, I think it just makes the drums feel a bit more full. It's super subtle. It probably doesn't even need to be there, but I'm going to include it in the product file anyways for you to download. The clap, I have 2 layers, and this layer is cut off a little bit. So go back, just cutting off that long tail so that I can introduce my own reverb to it, and then an EQ cutting out the lows. And then, of course, the clap is very basic, just a bit of swing on there so that the clap feels a bit wider, like longer, because I have the first hit, and then I have the second one coming in a little bit after. Right, if I do it really slow. So it makes that clap feel a bit fuller because it's kind of having 2 transients. The higher energy track requires a little bit more of like a sharper, more aggressive snare or clap, because then it increases the energy as well. Then I have these percussion, and these are actually really helpful to keep the track super interesting subconsciously. So this first percussion, a very simple, groovy rhythm. I suggest doing this kind of percussion or any type of sound that has like a rhythmic element in your tracks, because it will keep the listener engaged like a hook, right? If you have it rhythmic and catchy, it's a hook. So you can listen to it. That in it of itself is already catchy. You can listen to that and it still is dancey and, you know, groovy. I actually lowered this percussion by quite a bit to get it nice and like low and full. I EQ'd out some of the lows and the highs, and I pushed up this area here to give it a bit of character. Some delay, and then some reverb. And the delay and reverb makes it more textural and kind of fades it into the background a little bit, so it's not just so like stagnant. And then some hard compression because it's a very punchy sound that I wanted to calm it down a little bit. So what's valuable about this is that it's adding that catchiness, it's adding that groove, and this can make the track feel much more like interesting over a long period of time because it's catchy. Enough said. But I also have this textural loop that is doing that as well by adding ear candy. I'm going to talk about that before I talk about the driving perk. The textural loop is subconsciously so interesting to your ears. You're constantly picking up on this like weird sound. It's got a lot of movement, it's dynamic, but when you listen to the whole track, you don't really notice it's there. Like even just the drums, it's kind of in the background. But if I turn off the percussion, listen how much less interesting the drums are. And it's a combination of these 3 things here. This first percussion is creating a bit of a rhythm, a little bit more of like a driving rhythm that you can kind of lock into. This percussion, this textural loop, is filling up all that space and gluing all the drums together. And this also has a rhythm on it. It's also catchy just to play this with the kick. A little bit more like off timing and like not so to the grid that it's not as catchy as the first perk, but it is adding a lot of value to the drums. This is so valuable in this style to add this. It will make the track so much more interesting for a long period of time because your ears are constantly trying to pick up on it and they don't even really notice it's there. Because this style is so repetitive, you want it to be hypnotizing or interesting repetitive. You don't want it to be boring repetitive because that can easily happen if you're not adding a lot of detail. That's going to constantly have the listener wanting to keep listening. And this is one of those things that you can do that can really help with that. To make a textural loop like this, it's pretty simple. You just need some EQing, reverb, delay, and a percussion loop or percussion sounds. So I have a loop here from Lotus Tunes Academy's new sample pack. Shout out to Lotus Tunes, great channel. And I've added in, that's how it sounds. It's full, there's a ton of stuff going on, but let me show you that even like a really full loop like this can work for this. So you turn on the auto filter, cut out a lot of the highs. I can even add a bit of LFO onto there to give some movement. It's going to add in even more dynamics. Auto filter cutting out the lows, adding some LFO. Make it a bit different than this one so that they're constantly moving back and forth differently. Some delay, this is important. Reverb. And then some EQ. Now let's add it to the drum loop. See how it just adds that like nice little textural sound? It just really fills up the background of the mix, and it can really trick your ears into listening for a long time without getting bored. Finally, I have the driving perk. This is important for creating more drive in the track. So like I said before, faster hits are going to make it sound a bit faster energy. So this percussion is literally just fast hits, and it increases that perceived tempo of the track. One more time, we'll listen to the drums with and without this driving perk. Just increases that perceived tempo. So probably what most of you have been waiting for is the bass line, and it sounds like this. This bass line has a ton of layers, well, you know, a decent amount of layers, and that's very valuable and important for this style of music. We have a driving bass line, which means that it is moving pretty fast, it's driving forward, it's energetic, but it's also rolling, which kind of makes it feel like it's constantly in a rolling fashion. To get this, usually for the rolling aspect, you don't want to have a lot of empty spaces in your bass notes. You don't want to have a lot of gaps, because then it makes it feel like the momentum is stopping, which makes it feel a bit more techy. And for the driving, you usually want faster hits. So combining those, you get a rolling driving bass line. So if I look at the MIDI here, you can see that it is pretty fast, and there's a little spot here that's slowed down. And so that way I can have a driving bass line, but it still feels a bit rolling, a bit of both. So on the group itself, just some EQ cutting out the low mids to reduce the muddiness, and some sidechain from the kick. So for this bass line, I have a sub, and here's the MIDI. And when you're making a rolling bass line, you want that, you know, that head bob to happen. You want it to feel super groovy. So the way that I achieved this is by having the 16th notes, which is in a lot of Subandrio's tracks, these 16th note bass lines, right? They're like this. I have the velocity lower here so that it doesn't interfere with the kick so much. And then of course some sidechain compression. But then I also have some movement here on this sound. I use an envelope to modulate instead of using automation, so that every time it goes past this, it opens up that cutoff. So you can just choose which instrument. So I'm choosing the sub, which is the MIDI clip for the sub. And then I choose filter one frequency, and then I can draw that in, and I can draw in whatever I want. And because of this, it creates like a nice kind of grooving. Just adds a bit of variation to the sub frequency without being too crazy. And I also have a different version of the sub that I called Sub More Chill. This one's less driving, more rolling, and a little bit lower energy. Also found that a lot of Subandrio's tracks did bass lines like this. So when you download the project file, you'll have two kind of variations to work with. This is a wavetable in this one, and this is Vital. I'll be using Vital for a lot of the sounds in this video because it is a free synth that you can download. So if you want to grab the presets or follow along, you can download this absolutely free. But for this one, I used wavetable because it's a very, very simple sound. It's just a sawtooth with an octave down lower, and then a triangle wave on the second layer, and then some cutoff opening up like a pluck. Then just some compression for the sidechain, obviously. Pretty simple sound. The sub chill, same idea, it's just a sawtooth, and this one is a square wave. Gives it more of like that boom, kind of plucky, spacey sound by using the square wave. Moving on to the bass accents, this is where a lot of the track has its character. So the bass line is full, it's carrying that sub along really, really well. Driving, it's powerful, but when you get into these accents, so much of the bass line lives in these bass accents, and that's where you get that Subandrio complexity. So in a lot of his tracks, I heard this kind of mid bass that was like a polyrhythm to the sub bass. The sub bass was playing a different MIDI than this other second mid bass. This is not the easiest thing to accomplish because sometimes when you have more than one rhythm, it kind of counteracts the groove. You want to make sure that your second rhythm is still working with the first rhythm. So you want to be very careful when doing this, that they still work together. And if they don't add value to the groove, change it or get rid of it. Don't just put it there for the sake of making it complex. Make sure that it fits well. The reason I think this works so well is because right here, when the bass is going whoop on the sub, it's playing this double note. So they work together by lifting that kind of groove at the same time. And it just works pretty well together. And the mid bass is just filling up the mids a little bit. If I play the bass without the mid bass, it feels a bit more deep. And with the mid bass on, it feels more warm. So it's really up to you which way you prefer. I like the warmer bass. To make this, I used a Vital preset. It's from my Lane 8 video. It's one of the leads I made in there, but then I just took off the top oscillator and just used a sawtooth, making like a pluck. Very, very simple sound. That's how it sounds without the EQ, which is pretty crazy because with the EQs, it sounds way better. So all this is doing is using an envelope 2 on the filter cutoff, opening up this to make a pluck. But because it's so bass heavy, I had to EQ a lot of the low end. This filter step is another free tool, and basically you click this die and it draws in a randomized filtering, and then you just choose which filter that you'd like, and it just adds a bit of variation to the bass. These subtle details are what's going to make your track interesting for such a long period of time. Because your track is so repetitive, you need these little details to keep people interested and keep their ears constantly feeling like there's a lot going on that they can't really pick up on. It's a very subconscious thing, but it's very important to do if you want to achieve this level of quality. Then I have some sidechain from the bass taps. So the bass taps are these ones here. And I wanted those to cut through the mix a bit better, so I put sidechain on here. So when they play, they're just going to squish down this mid bass because this is more of like the strong sound that I want to cut through the mix. I made this one in Wavetable, but I also made it in Vital. In both versions, I took a simple waveform, sawtooth, and I believe it's a square, and I added some changes to the Wavetable pulse width. So in here I used sync. This is how it sounds with everything off. Really bass heavy, so I can turn the EQs back on. Much more like a pluck. And then I have some automation on the cutoff, so it's controlling. I just grab a pencil tool, I hold command, and I draw in my automation. This will make it feel, again, much more interesting because your ears are always they're not used to what's happening. It's not the same every single time, so your ears don't pick up on it and you don't know what to expect moving forward, which makes it much more interesting. So I draw this in and make it a little bit humanized because it's not perfect. And then over here, I start to open it up a bit more and use the cutoff to make part of a groove. So at this part here, I open up the cutoff so it actually hits, right? Ba-ba-ba-bum. I do that every time. But I change it every time, so it's always different, it's always interesting. And this is something I wanted to talk about as well. To make these really groovy, catchy bass lines, you have to be adding in accents that are catchy and groovy. Just like I did with the percussion earlier, it has to be placed in a place in your MIDI that is catchy. You can't just throw in random hits. So I'll talk about this a little bit more later about where to kind of place sounds to make it more interesting, but I've chosen this part specifically so that it adds to the groove. Going back to the sound, I can go into the fold and bring that back up. If I play around with the pulse width on both of these, it will actually change the character of the sound quite a bit. This is really effective in changing your sound design. You can play around with the wavetable pulse width and it can really drastically change the character and the contour of your sound so that you're not just using a stereotypical simple sounding pluck anymore. You can change these all around and just get really different timbres, and it's so easy to do. Like I said, I did this in Vital as well. Same thing, if you don't have wavetable, I just went into Vital and literally did the same thing, used a different waveform, changed this to inharmonic. Very simple to do and really elevates your sound design. And then also with this EQ, I'm doing the same thing. I'm changing the contour or the kind of timbre of the track, of the pluck. So if I move this back and forth, you get a bit of a different sound. Very simple to do and gives you much more possibilities with your sound design. That's more EQ, cutting out the mids here and some delay and some compression. Up next, I have a bass percussion, and this is actually something that I do a lot of the time to add a bit more punch to my bass line. So I'm just using a simple percussion, cut out a lot of the rest of the tail of it. We just need the beginning of that sound for that transient. And then I'm using an EQ to cut out a lot of the lows, right? It's not even a good sound, really. But then I use the EQ to clean it up. Just grab that knock, some delay, and some compression. This is going to elevate that bass line quite a bit because now you have the lows of the bass line, but you also have another textural percussion that's landing with the bass. So just listen to the difference it makes in the full bass line with and without that kind of like textural sound. It just helps level up the bass even more to feel more interesting and more dynamic. The last thing I wanted to touch on is using bass accents. It can be tricky sometimes to choose where you want to place them. So I recommend writing out your sub, getting a nice groovy sub, and then grabbing a preset and jamming along with a MIDI keyboard instead of drawing in MIDI for it. Because then you can kind of get a nice feeling for the track. You can jam along and then choose the best kind of placement for your bass accents. But these are really helpful in keeping the track really groovy and keeping them interesting by having these like 1 or 2 note hits in your bass loop that's going to keep it really catchy. So I have a preset pack here. These are some presets that I made recently for Basic Waves pack. I'm just, you know, it's in Serum. I'm going to show off a little bit because I'm pretty proud of the presets that I made. I'm going to choose a preset that I think will sound good, and I actually really like this one. Turn the cutoff down a little bit maybe. I like this sound quite a bit, and I have an arpeggiator on here, and this is so that when I record it, it'll still be in time because it'll quantize to the 16th. So if I'm recording it, it won't be off time and sloppy. Then I hit record. That already sounds pretty badass. I can do it again, think of something different. There we go, I like that one too. So then I can cut this out, use the ones that I like, make sure that it's actually quantized, and it's not, so I'll go like this, quantize them. Once I have my groove ready, I can cycle through some different presets and see what I like. It's much easier than trying to choose a sound and a rhythm at the same time. Get one done first and then do the other one after. And it's just keep them super simple. That's my biggest thing. Listen to it, add in 1 or 2 notes and try to make it groovy. It's really not that difficult. And then add 1 or 2 of these. It will elevate your bass line tremendously. Up next, we have the synths. Actually, before I jump into the synths, there is one thing I wanted to mention before I forget. In the description, there's a bunch of free checklists, free sample packs, free project files for Ableton, as well as links to my masterclass, music production courses, and my mentorship and coaching programs. So if you are serious about learning much faster, then I highly recommend checking those out. The first thing in the synths is going to be this atmospheric glue. I recommend starting with this when you're writing a track because it's very easy to write melodies once you have this like glue atmosphere present. Like if I'm playing this atmospheric glue and then I play a nice little lead, it's a lot easier to kind of imagine how it's going to sound in the end of the track rather than right? It just doesn't hit the same, but with this atmosphere on, it just feels like you have like a nice foundation to work with melodically. So I highly recommend starting with that. To make a sound like this, you just add a really big reverb onto a sound, usually something very lush like a vocal or a string or a supersaw, and then you freeze the long tail of that reverb and then record it. And as you're recording, you can add some movement like this, right? Push things up, open and close filters. Doing things like this in the recording will make it so that it's not just the same sound the whole time. You can hear there's a bit of movement back and forth with some auto pan. There's some filtering. It gets like a little bit quieter and more open. This is such a good way of keeping your listeners interested because it's so dynamic. There's so much detail moving around. Even though it's a bit more subtle, it is really interesting to be hearing it constantly in the background, especially if you double that up with another one, which has a different set of movement, different filtering, different auto panning, different volumes changing, and a different timbre, and it really can elevate the melodic atmosphere of your track. On this one, I also have some sidechain compression, so it has like a pumping. That pumping also makes it feel a bit faster, a bit more intense. And then I also have another reverb on here to soften it up even more. And lastly, I had this pad support, which is just adding a bit of like backbone to the atmosphere. So dynamic with so much movement and change that it's a lot of ear candy. And for this style of music, you'll probably want a lot of that movement in the atmosphere to keep people listening, because there's usually a lot of atmosphere in these tracks and not so many lead sounds. I actually have a full video on how to make these types of pads. So if you want to check that out after this video, click this card right here. Up next, I have this like very Subandrio style transitional sound. So metal. I love that sound. I've actually taken it over here, made it higher pitched by an octave, and just... just sounds so cool. So to make this, it's a lot of OTT, some EQ, reverb, and delay, but mostly it's the OTT and then the vital. So the vital is just a sawtooth. If I press the note, it has a bit of an attack on this envelope here, and a long release. And the long release helps it kind of fade out, and it's just literally a sawtooth wave. The only effects here are a compressor, which is using multiband. This distortion is not even really doing anything, but the compressor is multiband, so it's really squishing down the lows, mids, and highs. And then I'm doubling that up with another OTT. Gets it so it's destroying it. It's clipping like crazy, but it doesn't matter because it sounds better clipping because it has distortion. Another deep wave makes it even more gritty, and some compression to try and calm it down a little bit. Delay, reverb, and then this EQ here is actually cutting out the lows. And I'm using that contour effect again. So I'm pushing up an area to give it a bit of a different sound. So it's more like a little bit more warm, I guess, and less nasally. And you can pull out more of the nasaliness up here. Yeah, very cool sound, very gritty and very Subandrio. He does it in a lot of his stuff. And then I'm just carrying that through the breakdown. And I actually EQ out a little bit of the top end here to transition into the lower one. We already covered pad support. This sound is pretty cool. It is a nice addition to the drop. It is groovy and it has a lot going on. It's very textural, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. Because the bass line is so full, there's so many layers, there's so many elements, I wanted to add something that's not going to take up a lot of space. And luckily, I found this in my samples, which works really well on the track. It just kind of perfectly fit in the only empty space I really had left in the track, in those like high mids. And this is actually something from one of my old sample packs. So this is from my Patreon pack in December of 2023. So this is something that I made in a previous track, or I made it for my Patreon, and then I save these in my user library to use later. Right, so I'll take this and I'll throw it in my track and I'll be like, oh, maybe this works. Let's try it out. Not the right BPM, but the idea is there. So I just grabbed this, threw it in, and it actually sounded really good in the track. And to make this, I used this tool called Tantra. I don't remember exactly how I made this, but it sounds like I made it with Tantra, which is this cool like effect plugin that basically just like adds a bunch of weird like resonances and filtering, and it just really, I use it a lot on the channel, so you probably have seen it before, but it just made this really cool rhythmic sound. So I filtered it into the breakdown, and then on the drop, and it just elevates the drop so much because it's filling up the only empty space I have, the high mids, which I just mentioned, and it is creating a groovier drop without adding too much and without being too distracting. This is a kind of a hard balance to get, but luckily this sound was there. And if you're trying to make your own sounds like this, just really pay attention to what you have already and try to figure out what's missing without overcrowding it, which is not the easiest thing to do, but just try simple ideas first, or try textural things like this. The other balance is that you want to add something that is elevating it, but not doing too little or too much. So if you add something like, oh, my final drop, I'm gonna add in this little percussion that's, minus 30 dB that you're not really gonna hear, that's probably not really gonna elevate the track too much. But if you add in a tom that's super loud, that's really obvious, it might take up too much space. So you want to try to find the middle ground of something that's going to make the final drop a little bit different, a little bit more interesting, but it doesn't need to be something that's game changing. Then just some EQ on here, cutting out the lows and filtering out the high highs, because this is already really busy in my mix. Chords, this is a preset inside of Vital called Satellites, really nice. Really nice preset, and I just threw in simple triads. Simple. I kept the same pitch for the last two here to create tension, so that it's holding that note for a long time. That builds tension in the buildup. For the pluck, it is just a Vital preset with some automation on the cutoff, so it's building up in the breakdown and then filters out right before the drop. I did this because I didn't want the drop to feel like it was missing the pluck. If I have the pluck playing until the drop happens, it kind of feels like the drop should have the pluck in it. But by filtering it out before, it transitions a little bit nicer. A subtle detail, but it is really valuable. For the effects, pretty self-explanatory. I have some impact, some white noises, but I do have these nice, really big delayed sounds. So a huge delay, feedback is really big, decay on the reverb is really big, cutting out the lows and the highs, and then adding these like weird effects like risers and then changing the pitch on them. So I have one here, but then I have another one that's an extra semitone higher. So you get this really detuned sound. Super cool. And then a big delay and reverb on the actual channel. So I have 2 delays and 2 reverbs on this sound, and this just creates these huge washed out sounds. And when you hear them in the background, they just fill up the track, they make it lush, and they make it really atmospheric and really interesting. But then I have this snare roll from a sample pack from the Basic Waves, and it was just like a snare fill, but then I chopped up the sample so it would be a little bit more unique. I don't like just using like very 16th snare rolls that are very predictable. Some automation opening up that filter. makes it a bit more interesting. On my master, I have a limiter, which is making it louder. Ugh. All right, so if you want to learn how to make more bass lines like Subandrio style, there's deep driving, regressive, gritty bass lines, and you can check out this video right here where I actually cover how to make bass lines in this style. Make sure to download the project files in this link right here, or you can check out this playlist right here where I cover a bunch of other artists' music style.